So we shall look at how to sketch a quadratic function. For example, if we have a function f of x is equal to x squared plus x, then say minus 2. For us to be able to sketch this, we need to know a few properties. So the first thing we need to understand is the nature of the function. So the first thing we need to know is, will it open upwards or downwards? In other words, is it going to have a maximum or minimum turning point? So we do this by investigating the value in front of our x squared or the coefficient of x squared. So if it's more than 0, then the graph will open upwards. If it is less than 0, the graph will open downwards. So in this case, we have 1 as the coefficient of x squared. 1 is positive. So this implies that our graph will open upwards. If it opens upwards, then this point here is a minimum turning point. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we can determine the y-intercept. Y-intercept, or the point at which the graph is going to cross the y-axis. So that point is realized when the value of x is 0. So if the value of x is 0, we'll have f at 0 is equal to 0 squared plus 0 minus 2, and this will give us minus 2. So the point at which the graph will cross the y-axis, this point is x comma y, and here our x is 0, and our y that we found is minus 2. So from the y-intercept, so this will be 3, we need to know the x-intercept. So for the x-intercept, we need to say x-intercept this is the opposite, so we realize it when y is 0. So when y is 0, meaning when we have x squared plus x minus 2 being equal to 0. Then we just need to solve this equation. So we have product, which is minus 2. We multiply 1 times negative 2, since 1 is the coefficient of x squared. The sum is in the middle, so it's 1. The factors will have 1, 2, minus there. Since when we add them, we'll get positive 1, and when we multiply, we'll get negative 2. And since here the coefficient of x squared is 1, we'll go directly and say x, the first factor, which is minus 1, x again, second factor, which is plus 2, and this will be equal to 0. Therefore our x values are 1 and negative 2. So we have the x-intercepts as 1, 0 and negative 2, 0. And the last thing that we need to know is the turning point itself, so that we know where it is. So we need to know the turning point. So this turning point is what we are calling the vertex. So this point x comma y, our x is found by applying the formula minus b over 2a, where a is the coefficient of x squared and b is the coefficient of x. So from our equation, so we shall say this is equal to minus our b is the coefficient of x, which is 1, Okay, and our coefficient of x squared is our a, which is 1 in this case. So we have minus 1 over 2. Okay, so that's our x value. Then our y value, we find it by evaluating the function f that we have at the point x. In this case, it's minus b over 2a, which we found as minus 1 over 2. So we have minus 1 over 2. So we shall substitute minus half where there is x in f. So we shall have minus 1 over 2 squared. Then we're adding x, but x is negative, so we shall have that. And then we're saying this is minus 2. So we shall say this is equal to, if we square this, we'll have 1 over 4. Since negative 1 squared is also a positive. And then we shall have minus half plus 2. So we have 1 half plus 4 halves, which is 5 halves. And if we evaluate this, the denominator is 4. 4 into 4, 1. 1 times 1, it's 1. Minus 2 into 4, it's 2. 2 times 5 is 10. And this will give us negative 9 over 4. Okay. So this turning point will be x, which is minus 1 over 2, comma y, which is minus 9 over 4. Okay, so that will be our turning point. So now remember, the only other 2 points that we need are the intercepts. So we have the x-intercepts. So we have x-intercepts. X-intercepts, we have 1, 0 and minus 2, 0. And then the y-intercept, we have, for the y-intercept, we have 0, negative 2. We have 0, negative 2. And our graph is going to open upwards. So if we now draw our xy plane, we can have our xy plane like that, and then can do that. This is our origin. So we are going to say our x-intercepts are 1, 0 and minus 2, 0. So I'll assume minus 2 is there. I'll put a cross, and 1, I'll assume it's there. I'll assume 1 is here, and I'll put a cross there. Okay, so this is the point 1, 0, and this is the point minus 2, 0, and 0, minus 2, I'll say it's a point somewhere there. Okay, and then my turning point is negative half, negative 9 over 4. So negative half, I'll assume it's somewhere here, and negative 9 over 4, that's 4 point something. So assume it's down here, somewhere here. So we shall say this is negative 9 over 4. We shall do that. So remember, the nature of our graph is opening upwards. So it will come from this end, pass through our first x point, then turn at this point, cross the y at that point, cross the x again at that point, and continue on. So that's our graph. Okay, so what if we have another function, say f of x is equal to, say, minus x squared plus 2x minus 3. So number one, we know the coefficient of x squared is minus 1, is less than 0, meaning our graph will open downwards to have a maximum turning point. Number two, we need to find the y-intercepts, or y-intercept rather. This is when x is 0. So f at 0 will simply be a minus 3, and this point will be 0, minus 3. Okay. Now for the x-intercepts, sometimes you might not have your parabola or quadratic function crossing the x. How do we do this? We check the discriminant value. So the discriminant, we know it's b squared minus 4ac. So if the discriminant is negative, then our roots are imaginary, which basically means our graph is never touching the x-axis. It will hang in either half of the xy plane. So let's see the case with this one. So in this case, we have a as negative 1, b as 2, and c as negative 3. So if we compute this, we're going to have b squared, which is 2 squared, which is 4, minus 4 times a is negative 1, c is negative 3. So we'll have this as equal to 4 minus, since this is positive, and we'll have a 12, since 4 times 3 is 12. And this is going to be equal to minus 8, which is less than 0, as we've seen in this case. So in this particular scenario, our roots are not on the x-axis, they are imaginary. So the graph won't cross the x-axis, it will rather hang in either half of the xy plane, which is what we are going to see. So from finding this, we just need to now look at the turning point itself, or the vertex. So the vertex here is a coordinate as well, x, y. So we find x by minus b over 2a. So if we check our function, we have b as 2 and a as negative 1. So we have minus b is 2 over 2 times a, or a is negative 1. So this will be equal to negative 2 over negative 2, which is simply 1. Now, as we said in the earlier example, y is simply f at minus b over 2a. In this case, it's 1. So this is going to be equal to minus of 1 squared plus 2 on 1 minus 3. And this is going to be equal to minus 1 plus 2 minus 3, which is equal to 1 minus 3, which is minus 2. So this coordinate is going to be equal to x comma y, which is 1 comma minus 2. So that's our vertex point, and we can now try to sketch. So we can draw our rough xy plane. This is our origin. So our vertex is 1 comma negative 2, so we can assume 1 is there, negative 2 is there, so the point is somewhere there. Okay, and then we have our y-intercept as 0 comma minus 3. So if, for example, we extend this and say this is our minus 3, 0 comma minus 3 is this point there, and we know our graph is opening downwards, so it will come from wherever it's coming from, cross this point, and then it will turn at this point and go back like that. Okay, so that will be our graph. Because of how it is, we can see that the graph is not even touching the x-axis because our roots are imaginary. It is not crossing the x-axis. So if we look at another example where we have f of x is equal to x squared minus 2x plus 1. So for this case again, we check the nature. Coefficient of x squared is 1, it's more than 0. So in this case our graph will open up, and then x-intercepts we find these when our y value is equal to 0. So we'll have x squared minus 2x plus 1 equal to 0. If we factorize here, we have product as 1, sum as negative 2, and then our factors, we have 1, 1, negative, negative. When we add them, we'll get negative 2. When we multiply them, we'll get positive 1. Therefore, since the coefficient of x squared is 1, we shall have x minus 1, x minus 1 is equal to 0. So we'll have x is equal to 1, 1. And what does this mean? It means our x-intercepts are 1, 0 and 1, 0. Meaning on the x, our graph is just crossing on one point. Ooh, interesting. So let's see what this means. So if now we find our y-intercept, y-intercept, this is when x is 0. So when x is 0, f at 0 is going to be 0 squared minus 2 times 0 plus 1, which will simply give us 1. So our y-intercept is the point 0, 1. Okay, now we just need to figure out the value of x and the value of y for the vertex. Okay, so for the vertex, we know it's x comma y. Now our x is minus b over 2a, so it will be minus of our b, which is minus 2 over 2 times a. Our a is 1, and this is giving us 2 over 2, which is simply 1. And then our y is f at minus b over 2a, which is f at this value. In this case it's 1, and this will be equal to 1 squared minus 2 times 1 plus 1, and this will give us 2 minus 2, which is 0. So this will in the end be x, which is 1, comma y, which is 0. So what you realize is that if your x-intercepts are the same, okay, if you're getting the same value for your x-intercepts, that value is the same value as the turning point or the vertex. Okay, that's another property. So we have 1, 0 for our turning point and the x-intercept. And we know our graph is opening upwards. Okay, so if we were to draw this, so we have the vertex as 1, 0. This is 0, 1, 0. We can assume 1 is there. That's our vertex or turning point. And then this same turning point is our x-intercept, since they are repeating at 1, 0, both of them. So the other thing is to just know the y-intercept, which is 0, 1, and we sketch. So 0, 1 is there. We can put a cross, and we know our graph is opening upwards. So to come from there, cross that point, it will bounce off from the turning point, since it has to turn back, and it will go up like that. So that will be our graph. So don't forget to drop all your questions about this content in the comment section below, and also subscribe to get alerts on more new content as it gets uploaded on the channel.